Hello everyone, Detective Frost here. Welcome back to the True Crime series, The Cold Files. File number 03D, The Christmas House That Left 5 Names Behind. On Christmas morning, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sodder family home was gone. What had been a warm house filled with children, holiday noise, and the last hours of Christmas Eve had become a blackened frame against the winter morning. Outside stood George and Jenny Sodder, parents of 10 children, trying to understand how one ordinary night had turned into something no family should ever have to face. At first, the story seemed simple enough to explain. A fire had broken out after midnight. The family had escaped in panic. 5 of the Sodder children were believed to still be inside: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. But what made this case so unsettling was not only the fire itself, it was what came afterward. Because when the flames were out and the ruins were searched, the one thing everyone expected to find was not there. No clear remains, no final answers, nothing that could close the door and tell the family, with certainty, that their children had died inside that house. For George Sodder, an Italian immigrant and local businessman, and for Jenny, a mother who knew the rhythms of her own home better than anyone, the official explanation never seemed to fit cleanly. Too many details felt wrong. Too many moments, before and after the fire, refused to settle into a simple accident. In the years that followed, 5 names would be printed on billboards. Photographs would be shown to strangers. Rumors would move through the town and far beyond it. And one question would remain at the center of everything. Were the Sodder children truly lost in the fire, or did something else happen on that Christmas night? But before the billboard, before the theories, before decades of unanswered questions, there was only a family at home on Christmas Eve. And shortly after midnight, the ordinary shape of that night began to break. By the time the Sodder home quieted down, Christmas Eve had ended the way it ends in many large families. Children stayed up later than usual. The house was busy, warm, and full of small holiday routines. Eventually, George and Jenny went to bed, believing the night was settling down. But after midnight, Jenny Sodder was awakened by the sound of the telephone. According to reports, when she answered, there was a woman on the line whose voice Jenny did not recognize. The caller seemed to be asking for someone who did not live there. In most cases, a wrong number in the middle of the night would be strange, but forgettable. Jenny hung up and tried to return to sleep. Then came another sound. She later described hearing a heavy sound on the roof, followed by something that seemed to roll downward. Again, in the moment, there was no way to know what it meant. It could have been anything: a branch, ice, some ordinary sound made larger by the stillness of the night. About half an hour later, Jenny woke again. This time, the house was filling with smoke. The fire spread quickly. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to escape. Outside, in the cold darkness, the family realized that 5 children had not come out: Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jenny, and Betty. George tried to reach them. He attempted to get back inside, then looked for another way to access the upper floor. But almost immediately, the night began to work against him. The ladder that was normally kept beside the house was gone. Then George tried to use his trucks to reach the windows. According to the family, both vehicles had been working before, but that night, neither would start. The family tried to call for help, but even that process became painfully slow. In a small town in 1945, emergency systems were not what they are today. Reports later stated that the fire department did not arrive until around 8 o'clock in the morning, many hours after the fire had begun. The first tragedy was the fire. The second was time. The time lost before anyone could properly search what was left. At first, authorities treated the case as a fatal house fire. The explanation that took shape was simple. The children had died inside, and the fire may have been connected to the electrical system. Death certificates were issued. On paper, the case could be written as a terrible accident, but that explanation had one problem. When the ruins were searched, there were no clear remains of the 5 children. That absence became the center of everything. Not a dramatic clue, not a confession, not a witness who could explain the night, just a space in the ashes where something should have been and was not. For George and Jenny, the questions did not come all at once. At first, there was grief, then confusion, then memory began to arrange the night in a different order. The phone call, The sound on the roof, the missing ladder, the trucks that would not start, the difficulty getting help. And beneath all of it, the silence of 5 missing children. In many cases, a missing object means very little. But in the Sodder case, almost every missing object seemed to arrive at the worst possible moment. There were other details too. According to reports, the family believed the telephone line may have been cut. They also remembered earlier threats directed toward George Sodder, an Italian immigrant who had reportedly been outspoken in ways that created tension with certain people in the community. One person, before the fire, had allegedly warned that the family's electrical system could cause a fire, even though George believed the wiring had already been checked. None of these details proved an abduction. They did not overturn the official conclusion by themselves, but together, they were enough to make the Sodders believe the story had not been fully told. So the family began their own search. In the years after the fire, George and Jenny questioned the idea that 5 children could vanish so completely in a house fire. They followed rumors. They listened to reported sightings from people who claimed they had seen some of the children alive after Christmas morning. These sightings were never confirmed, and they never led to a definitive answer. But for a family already living with uncertainty, even a weak lead was difficult to ignore. In 1947, the Sodders contacted the FBI. According to later accounts, the Bureau indicated that the matter was local and that federal assistance would require cooperation from local authorities. That cooperation did not move forward in the way the family hoped. Then, in 1949, the Sodders had the site excavated again. Small bone fragments were found and sent for examination, but the results did not give the family closure. A Smithsonian report stated that the fragments did not clearly match the ages of the missing children, showed no clear signs of fire exposure, and may have come from soil that had been brought in after the blaze. The largest question remained exactly where it had been from the beginning. Where were the children? By the late 1960s, the family received one of the most haunting pieces of the case, a photograph of a young man who was said to be Louis Sodder as an adult. The image gave them another possible path, and they hired a private investigator to pursue it. But like the sightings, the photograph never produced a confirmed answer. By then, the case had become something larger than a fire investigation. It had become a wound that stayed open in public. The Sodders placed the children's names and faces on a billboard, asking for information year after year. In Fayetteville, that sign became part of the landscape, not just as a plea for help, but as proof that the family refused to let the story disappear. There were no arrests, no trial, no confirmed proof that the children had been taken. But there was also no physical evidence strong enough to convince George and Jenny that all 5 had simply died in the fire. George Sodder died in 1969 without knowing what happened to his children. Jenny continued to mourn them for the rest of her life, reportedly wearing black until her death in 1989. Their surviving daughter Sylvia also continued to believe that her siblings may have lived beyond that night. For the authorities, the case could be closed. For the Sodder family, it never really ended. What makes the Sodder case so difficult to forget is that its most haunting detail is not something dramatic that was found. It is something that was missing. A house can burn. Memories can become uncertain. Witnesses can disagree. Small towns can carry rumors for years. But when a family is asked to accept the worst possible answer, they need something solid enough to hold. In the Sodder case, George and Jenny were left with the opposite: unanswered questions, delayed help, lost traces, and a silence in the ashes that never stopped speaking to them. That does not mean every suspicion was proof. Hope can shape the way people read evidence, especially when grief is involved. But it is also true that a weak beginning can leave a case damaged forever. Once time passes, once a scene is disturbed, once early mistakes become part of the record, even the truth can become harder to recognize. The Sodder children left behind no confirmed final answer, only 5 names, 5 photographs, and a question that survived longer than the house itself. Maybe the fire took them, maybe something else happened that night. But what remains certain is that their family never stopped looking. The Sodder case leaves us with a family searching through absence, through the spaces where evidence should have been. But sometimes, a disappearance begins even more quietly, not with fire or smoke, but with a simple decision to take a walk. 1 year later, in the cold hills of Vermont, an 18-year-old college student stepped onto a trail and never came back. And again, the question was not only where she went, but how long it took to understand she was gone. File number 03E, the red coat that entered the Bennington woods. On a cold December afternoon in 1946, a red coat was seen moving toward the Vermont woods. It was the kind of image that should have meant nothing at the time. A young woman walking alone, a narrow road, the first edge of winter settling over the mountains. But by nightfall, that red coat would become one of the last clear images anyone had of Paula Jean Welden. Paula was 18 years old, a sophomore at Bennington College in Vermont. She was an art student, remembered as creative and active, someone who painted, sketched, played guitar, and knew enough about the outdoors that a walk near the mountains did not seem impossible for her. She was not just a name in a missing persons file. She was a student at the age where life still felt unfinished, full of questions, changes, and small uncertainties that did not usually mean danger. Earlier that day, December 1st, Paula had worked in the dining hall, returned to her dormitory at Dewey Hall, and spoken with her roommate. According to reports, she said she wanted to take a break and go for a walk. At first, there was nothing about the situation that seemed unusual, but Paula left dressed lightly for the cold. She was said to have little or no money with her. A living expense check remained behind, uncashed. And as the afternoon faded, witnesses saw her making her way toward the long trail near Glastonbury Mountain, a trail that stretched far beyond what a short walk should have required. The last confirmed sighting came around 4 p.m., not long before sunset. After that, snow began to fall. By morning, the trail was still there. The witnesses were still there, but Paula was gone, and a short walk only stays ordinary if someone comes back from it. After 2:30 p.m., Paula Jean Welden left the Bennington College campus. According to reports, she was seen near the college not long afterward and accepted a ride from a passing driver. Paula told the driver she wanted to hike on the long trail near Glastonbury Mountain, outside Route 9. The driver took her part of the way, then dropped her along Route 9, still several miles from where the trail began. From there, Paula continued on foot. This is what makes the early timeline so important. Paula did not vanish from her room. She did not disappear in the middle of the night from a place no one could identify. She moved through a route that several people could later describe. A young woman in a red parka, walking alone toward the mountains, was noticeable. The bright parka should have made Paula easier to follow in memory. Instead, it became the last clear image anyone could hold on to. Several others reportedly saw her walking in the area that afternoon as she made her way toward the long trail. The most important sighting came around 4 p.m., when Paula spoke to a man on the trail and asked how far it went. He told her it continued all the way to Canada. It was a simple exchange. At the time, it may not have seemed important at all, but later, it became one of the final confirmed points in Paula's known timeline. Around 5 p.m., the sun went down. A few hours later, snow began to fall, eventually leaving several inches on the ground. Paula did not return to Dewey Hall that night. At first, the absence may have been easy to misunderstand. College students sometimes changed plans. They sometimes stayed out later than expected. But Bennington had rules. Students who were out after 11 p.m. were expected to sign out and then check back in when they returned. Paula had done neither. By the next morning, her roommate realized something was wrong. Paula had not come back. Then, when she missed class on Monday, the concern became more serious. The college contacted her family and the police, and what had begun as a quiet winter walk turned into a missing student case. At that point, the mystery was not that Paula had gone for a walk. The mystery was that every confirmed step after that walk led toward the woods, and then stopped. Searchers focused on Route 9, the long trail, and the area around Glastonbury Mountain. But the conditions were difficult from the beginning. The terrain was wooded and uneven. The weather had already changed. Snow could cover tracks, confuse direction, and erase small signs before anyone knew how important they were. And the search revealed another problem. Vermont was not fully prepared for a case like this. At the time, Vermont did not yet have a state police force. Law enforcement depended heavily on local and county systems, with outside help later coming from other states. In a disappearance where the first hours mattered, that lack of structure became deeply troubling. The first theory was the most direct one. Paula may have become lost and died from exposure. She had walked into a mountain area late in the afternoon, dressed too lightly for a long night outside, with sunset coming quickly and snow on the way. But that explanation had one problem. Searchers did not find the clear trace they needed. No confirmed final location, no personal item that explained where she had gone, no physical evidence strong enough to close the case. Another possibility was that Paula had left by choice. Investigators looked at her personal life, her studies, and whether she had been unhappy or uncertain about her future. But uncertainty is not the same as a plan to disappear. Paula left behind belongings, money, and an uncashed living expense check. Nothing clearly suggested she had prepared to start over somewhere else. A third possibility was that someone else had become involved. Some people were questioned or considered over time, but no evidence was strong enough to prove foul play. So each theory remained possible, but incomplete. Paula's disappearance shook Bennington and the wider state of Vermont. Over time, it became part of local memory, and later, part of the stories people would connect to the so-called Bennington Triangle. But that name came after the fact. It is not evidence. It is what communities sometimes create when too many questions gather in one place. There were no arrests, no trial, no confirmed answer. But Paula's case did leave behind a larger consequence. The failures and confusion surrounding the investigation helped push Vermont toward the creation of a state police force in 1947. Paula's case did not give Vermont an answer, but it did force Vermont to look at the system that had failed to find one. Paula Welden's disappearance is haunting because it begins with ordinary choices: a study break, a walk, a ride from a stranger, a red coat moving toward a trail just before winter darkness. None of those details, by itself, looks like the beginning of a mystery, but together, they form a timeline that is clear enough to follow, until it suddenly ends. That is what makes the case so difficult to sit with. Paula was not simply swallowed by rumor. She was seen. Her route was partly known. People remembered her. And still, after the snow fell, the trail gave back almost nothing. A better organized search may not have solved everything. Better systems do not always guarantee answers. But when the first hours of a disappearance are shaped by difficult terrain, winter weather, and limited organization, uncertainty can harden into something that lasts for generations. The name Bennington Triangle may be what keeps the story alive for many people. But before the legend, there was Paula, an 18-year-old student with a family, a future, and one final hour no one has been able to explain with certainty. The red coat entered the woods, and after that, the mountain kept its silence. Paula's case ended in silence. A known path, a visible coat, and a final stretch no one could explain. But not every disappearance fades beyond the reach of witnesses. Sometimes the last moments are captured clearly, frame by frame, and still reveal almost nothing. Years later, at an airport in Bulgaria, a young man would run from safety, leave everything behind, and vanish while the cameras were still watching. File number 03F, the airport camera that watched him run away. The camera did not show anyone chasing him. It only showed Lars Mittank running, as if something behind him was real. On the morning of July 8, 2014, at Varna airport in Bulgaria, Lars had almost reached the end of his trip. He had come there to fly home to Germany. He had his passport, his phone, his luggage, and a way out of a country where the last few days had already become confusing and tense. But within minutes, everything changed. After speaking with an airport doctor, Lars suddenly left the room in panic. He did not calmly collect his belongings. He did not call his mother to explain what was happening. He abandoned the things most travelers would never leave behind and ran through the airport, out into the open, toward a fence, and then toward the trees beyond it. The recording captured his movement clearly. What it did not capture was the thing he seemed to fear. Lars Joachim Mittank was 28 years old, a German citizen on vacation with old friends in the resort area of Golden Sands, near Varna. According to reports, most of the trip had seemed normal. The beach, the nightlife, the familiar rhythm of friends traveling together before returning home. And that is part of what makes his disappearance so difficult to understand. Lars was not introduced to the world as a mystery. He was a son, a friend, a young man on holiday, close enough to home that a return flight should have ended the story quietly. Instead, the airport became the last confirmed place he was ever seen. From the moment Lars ran out of the camera's frame, there has been no confirmed answer to the question, at the center of this case: was he running from a real threat, from a misunderstanding, or from something happening inside his own mind? But near the end of the trip, something changed. Not at the airport yet, but after a night out. Near the end of the trip, the tone of Lars Mittank's vacation changed. He had traveled to Golden Sands, a resort area near Varna, Bulgaria, with a group of old friends. According to reports, most of their time there seemed normal. They went out, spent time near the beach, and prepared to return to Germany like any other group at the end of a holiday. But around July 5th or 6th, 2014, shortly before the flight home, Lars was allegedly involved in a confrontation with another group of tourists. The dispute was said to have started over football. Later, Lars told his friends he had been struck in the face and was left with pain around his jaw and an injury to his ear. He sought medical attention and was reportedly prescribed an antibiotic, often identified in accounts as cefprozil. Because of the ear injury, he was advised not to fly immediately. That advice changed everything. On July 7th, Lars's friends flew back to Germany without him. Lars stayed behind in Bulgaria alone, planning to return once he was cleared to travel. At that point, he was not missing. He still had a plan. He still had his belongings. He was still trying to get home. But the distance between Lars and home was no longer measured only in kilometers. It was measured in fear. Lars checked into the Hotel Color Varna, closer to the airport. That night, his behavior reportedly became more anxious and difficult to explain. He called his mother, Sandra Mittank, and told her that people were trying to rob or kill him. According to later accounts of the hotel footage, he was seen pacing in the hallway, looking out windows, and at one point hiding in an elevator. Then came one of the most important gaps in the timeline. In the early hours of July 8th, Lars left the hotel for a period of time and later returned. What happened during that gap has never been clearly established. There is no confirmed public answer for where he went, who he may have met, or whether anything happened that intensified his fear. By morning, Lars reached Varna Airport. He appeared to be doing what he had intended to do all along, find a way home to Germany. He entered the airport with his luggage, phone, passport, and documents. He met with airport doctor Kosta Kostov to check whether he was fit to fly. According to reports, the doctor found that Lars could travel, but also noticed that he seemed nervous and was acting unusually. And then the moment captured on CCTV began. The footage is unsettling because it feels like evidence, but it is also incomplete. We can see Lars leaving the medical room. We can see him moving quickly through the terminal. We can see him abandon the things a traveler normally protects: his bags, his phone, his passport. We can see him run out of the building, across the airport grounds, over a fence, and toward the trees and open land beyond. What we cannot see is why. The recording does not show anyone chasing him. That does not prove Lars was not afraid of something real. It only means the image cannot confirm what he believed was happening in that moment. After Lars disappeared beyond the airport fence, investigators had to answer the question the footage could not. Where did he go next? Searches focused on the area around the airport, nearby roads, wooded spaces, and possible places someone in his state might have gone. His mother later continued the search with private help, including efforts to check hospitals and unidentified patients. But no confirmed trace of Lars was found. Several theories formed around the case. One possibility is that Lars may have been threatened by someone. He had told his mother that people were after him, but no publicly confirmed evidence has proved that a group was pursuing him or that he was connected to a criminal situation. Another possibility is that Lars may have entered a sudden state of panic or confusion. Some have pointed to the confrontation, the injury, being alone in a foreign country, stress, lack of sleep, or medication as possible factors. But without Lars, no one can responsibly diagnose what was happening inside his mind. A third theory is that he chose to disappear, but that explanation is difficult to support. Lars left behind documents, luggage, and his phone. He also had a close relationship with his mother, and there has been no confirmed evidence that he began a new life somewhere else. Over the years, there have been reported sightings. Some were mistaken. One widely discussed case in Brazil turned out not to be Lars, but another missing man, Anton Pilipa from Canada. Other claims could not be verified, so the final image remains the clearest piece of the case, and the most frustrating one. For the internet, the airport footage became a mystery to pause, replay, and analyze. For Sandra Mittank, it was something very different. The last place her son was still visible. There has been no conviction, no official public suspect, no confirmed proof that Lars is alive, and no evidence strong enough to say exactly what happened after he ran from Varna airport. The camera showed the world Lars running, but it never showed what he was running from. Lars Mittank's case is unsettling because it gives us an image, but not an answer. We can watch him run. We can pause the footage, replay it, and study every movement. But none of that tells us what he believed was behind him, or what was happening inside his mind in those final visible moments. The camera captured his body leaving the airport, but it could not capture fear itself. And that is what makes the footage so incomplete. CCTV can make a mystery feel closer to the truth, because it lets us see something with our own eyes. But seeing is not always understanding. In Lars's case, the most important part of the story remains outside the frame. Maybe the danger was real. Maybe it was misunderstood. Maybe a chain of injury, isolation, stress, and panic turned a place of return into a place he felt he had to escape. What remains is not a clean mystery, but a human moment caught on camera, and then lost beyond it. The airport camera watched Lars Mittank run, but it could not follow him far enough to explain why. Until someone can say what happened after the fence, Lars remains suspended between fear, possibility, and silence. Across all three cases, the most difficult part is not only that people vanished, it is how close they all seem to be to something ordinary: a family home on Christmas Eve, a college student taking a walk before sunset, a traveler standing inside an airport, only minutes away from the possibility of going home. None of these places looked impossible to understand at first. They were familiar spaces: a house, a trail, a terminal, places where life usually follows a pattern. But in each story, that pattern broke, and what remained afterward was not a clear answer, but a gap. The Sodder case was shaped by what was missing from the ashes. Paula Welden's case was shaped by a visible route that ended too soon. Lars Mittank's case was shaped by footage that showed his final confirmed movement, but not the reason behind it. 3 different disappearances, 3 different decades, 3 different places, and yet each one leaves us facing the same uncomfortable truth. Evidence does not always arrive in the form we need it to. Sometimes the problem is time, a delayed response, a search that begins too late, weather that erases traces, or a scene that can never be preserved the way it should have been. Sometimes the problem is interpretation. A small detail looks harmless until later. A wrong number, a red coat, a nervous movement on camera. Each detail can seem ordinary in the moment, and only become meaningful after the person is already gone. And sometimes the problem is that people are asked to live with uncertainty before they are ready. Families are left with theories instead of answers. Communities build legends around unanswered questions. The internet replays fragments, freezes frames, and tries to turn mystery into certainty. But a paused video, a remembered sighting, or a strange absence can only tell part of the story. That is why these cases stay with us. Not because they prove one hidden truth, not because every theory deserves the same weight, but because they remind us how fragile certainty can be when the beginning of a case is unclear, when the first hours are lost, or when the strongest clue still does not explain what happened. Maybe the Sodder children died in the fire. Maybe something else happened that night. Maybe Paula Welden lost her way, met someone, or disappeared for reasons no one can now prove. Maybe Lars Mittank was running from a real threat, a misunderstanding, or a fear no camera could capture. What we know is limited. What we do not know is what keeps these stories alive. In the end, the places where people vanish without answers are not always remote or strange. Sometimes they are places people trusted: a home, a trail, an airport, until one moment changed everything. And after that, the silence became part of the map. If you want more stories like this, consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching.
This file may be closed, but the truth is always out there. What do you think really happened? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to follow the next case. I'm Detective Frost, and this is the Cold Files.